going into hip hop. Hip hop is a foundational Black American creation. It's a positive creation that has changed the world. Instead of saying, hey, it's foundational Black Americans who created this culture, the narrative, well, Jamaicans helped do it too. Puerto Ricans helped do it too. Now they're saying Italians helped create some goddamn hip hop. You know what I'm saying? So instead of just giving us the credit, everybody has to kind of pick off of it and kind of vulture credit for themselves instead of giving us the credit for it. That's the problem.
Well, that's okay. I was gonna get to the hip hop thing.
Yeah.
I think the hip hop, the history of hip hop conversations is very important because hip hop is not just rapping.
No, it's not.
Africa Bambaataa broke down the elements, and most of us who are hip hop heads follow those elements from breakdancing, graffiti writing, DJing, rapping as well.
All from foundational Black Americans, all of it.
Well,
all created by FBAs.
There's no doubt Puerto Ricans were present in the
present
early
doesn't
1970s.
mean create. Present doesn't mean create. They were present. They were one or two at a couple of parties. They didn't create anything.
Well, how do we define create?
Create means you did something that nobody else was doing.
Okay. When it comes to breakdancing, there were Puerto Ricans creating breakdancing moves that nobody else was doing.
No, they were doing moves that some of the old breakdancers were doing. Crazy Legs and those dudes admitted they were doing old dance moves that the FBA dancers were doing. Puerto Ricans didn't start breaking until the late 70s, early 80s.
But those were new moves. Head spins, windmills. Crazy Legs invented the windmill.
No, there's videos of people doing certain things that look like windmills. He probably did a variation of something that was already going on. I've seen videos from the 1930s and 40s of Black people doing something that looks just like the windmill. There's stuff where Black people are doing the moonwalk. There's all types of footwork movements. There's people like Lil Buck, who was a dancer in the 1940s and 50s, doing floor work, and he inspired A1 B-Boy Sosa, Trixie, some of these people who were the early B-Boys in the early 70s. Black people were already doing these moves. They were getting a lot of the moves from James Brown and other people. We've been doing moves that look like breakdancing, and that's where they got it from. So, Puerto Ricans did not create any of that because you would see something like that in Puerto Rico. Where would they get it from if they didn't get it from us?
Well, I think hip hop is completely an American thing, regardless of where you're from.
It's a foundational Black American creation. Let's be very clear.
Also, it was created in the Bronx. Who was living in the Bronx, New York at the time in this neighborhood? There's two groups living in the Bronx in this neighborhood at this time. Black, foundational Black Americans, and right next to them were Puerto Ricans.
But the Puerto Ricans at the time in New York, many of them were on the same racist shit that we have a lot of people out here on. Puerto Ricans were not rocking with Black people in large numbers like that. In fact, the Puerto Rican gangs, they were walking around with swastikas on their damn jackets. The Puerto Ricans were called Nazis by some of the cats out there because they were aligning themselves with that white supremacist ideology. They were not rocking with brothers. You listen to interviews with Grandmaster Caz, he even said, hey man, it was only one or two Puerto Ricans rocking with us. They were racist against us and they were playing the congas and they weren't really going to the parties like that. It was only one or two. So we're not going to give credit to one or two folks who wandered off into a party and make it seem like that person was a creator. It's a 100% FBA creation.
Okay, well, in terms of the racism from the Puerto Ricans, I think that's from a specific generation because I have uncles and people before me that lived segregated in the Bronx. There were three main neighborhoods in the Bronx. On the other side of Webster Avenue was your Blacks. On this side was Puerto Ricans, and then if you went to the west, it was Italians. And you didn't cross these streets. And if you crossed these streets, you got your ass kicked. And even though I'm dark, brothers knew I wasn't from Webster Avenue. I'm not from there. If I went over there, I got my ass beat. And if someone came on this side, they got their ass beat. But as we got older, as my generation got older, we erased that division.
To a certain degree.
To a certain degree. My father's generation grew up with those divisions. I witnessed it as a kid, but as coming up, I wanted to hang out with Tyrone. Tyrone's coming over to my house. We broke, I believe my generation kind of broke those lines in the mid 70s, going into the late 70s. But, so your position is that there were no Puerto Ricans that innovated anything in hip hop?
No, they didn't create anything. Doing a move that you see a Black person do he's spinning right and then you spin to the left and say, hey, I created the left spin. That ain't creating anything. You just did a variation of what that black person did. Give the black person credit. If I go to Cuba and I get some beans and rice and put some hot sauce on it, that's not my new creation. I just put some sauce on some shit that was already there. I'm not gonna take credit from the people. There's a brother, I can't think of his name, it's Foundational Black American. He wrote and performed two of the biggest reggae hits. One of the songs was I Can See Clearly Now. That was one of the first big international reggae songs. He's from here. He didn't go over to Jamaica and say, hey man, look at what I created. I created this, even though he had the biggest hit. He said, look, I came over here, I respect the culture, I love what they were doing, I did my version of it just to pay homage. It became a huge hit, but this is their thing. That's how you do things with respect. You don't come over and do something that you see another culture doing, because the root of hip hop comes out of the Carolinas, if we're gonna be very honest. That's why many of the B-boys and the DJs in the Bronx, their roots are in the Carolinas. Even the B-boying music, James Brown is from the Carolinas. Some of the first rhymers, they got Pigmeat Markham. He made one of the first records in the 1960s that would be considered a rap record. He's rapping in 4-bar increments. He's from North Carolina. Grandmaster Caz, I think his family's from North Carolina. Melly Mel, I think his family's from North Carolina and South Carolina. One of the first female MCs.
Well, everybody black in New York City. Yeah. If you black in New York City, everybody's got family in the Carolinas.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so up in the Bronx, the root of that's coming out of the Carolinas. We got to give them credit. It didn't come out of Jamaica. There's absolutely nothing from Jamaica that influenced hip hop. Even Kool Herc, when he came over, he had to get rid of all of his Jamaican culture and really get more Americanized. According to him, he was doing what he saw the people in the Bronx doing. So we got to pay homage where homage is due.
Okay, so Kool Herc is considered one of the first DJs of hip hop, right?
There were others.
Yeah.
There were other Disco King Mario, who was before him. Flowers. The thing is, a lot of these DJs, they played break beats, but they played a lot of disco. They were primarily known as disco DJs. What set Herc apart, he played break beats. He didn't do any of the disco stuff. He said, I'm just gonna stick with the break beat stuff. These guys tamper with the break beats. I'm just gonna do primarily break beats and pander to the black spades and the street crowd. And that's how he got his niche in the Bronx.
Okay, what about when it comes to graffiti writing? Because when I was a kid, you actually had, out of white people, when it came to hip hop, they did graffiti. They weren't b-boying. They weren't. No, some of them were breakdancing, but they were doing graffiti out. If you went to a writers meeting at a writers bench in the Bronx, you're gonna see Puerto Rican kids, black kids, and white kids in 1975, 76, 77. So, what is your position on how graffiti evolved to become a integral part of hip hop?
The thing about graffiti, it was started, modern graffiti, meaning tagging your name on a wall in an artistic fashion, that got started by one dude, a Foundational Black American out of Philly named Cornbread in the early 1960s. Very well documented. He's still alive. He's still doing interviews now. We're going to get him for this new documentary I'm doing. One dude did that. He was doing it artistically. That became a real big thing. He got known for doing that, and then it spread into New York, tagging your name in a very artistic fashion, and that's how it took off. Again, we created all that stuff.
Yeah, what he did was he just wrote his name.
He did it in an artistic way. It was artistic the way he did it.
Egyptians were doing it in an artistic way.
We can
right?
we can go there.
I'm talking about
that's when
writing on trains, top to bottoms, using 10 different colors. Cornbread was not doing that.
But Cornbread, just the art of it, and turning it into an art form, he wasn't just right, it was an art form. People looked at that as an art form, and when you did it on the train, that was a form of art. You're tagging your name as a form of art. Now, how elaborate it is and the style, that's something else. You understand?
But would you say people innovated graffiti as
it
went through the years?
We're going to give credit to that dude, the man who did it, the man who started it, doing it in an artistic fashion. That was the Foundational Black American who did it, and everybody else picked up on that. They saw the shine that he would get, and they said, okay, let's do what he's doing, and let's put our own spin on it. So he created it. You got to give him credit for that.
Okay, so you're not going to give credit to no Puerto Ricans? Okay,
because you didn't create it. Show me, create something. I give people credit for creating. Do something that we didn't do. I'll give you credit for it.
If you look at the two biggest breakdancing groups in New York at the time,
Rocksteady,
New York City
New York City Breakers, and Rocksteady. That was in the 80s. Came much later.
Yeah, but these guys were doing their thing in the late 70s too.
Like 79. They really got started in the 80s. That's when they really took off in the 80s. And even they said, we were doing the old moves of the guys before us. They said that. And by that time, the first generation, those moves, they were telling Crazy Legs, and he did an interview saying, hey man, the black dudes were telling me, hey man, why are you doing those old moves? They're played out now. So they just picked up on what the brothers were already doing. Give the brothers their credit. It's not that hard to give foundational black Americans.
I want to give brothers credit, but
Yes.
I want to give, I personally am going to give the Puerto Ricans credit too, especially when it comes to breakdancing.
I give them credit. If you created some, I give you credit. They didn't create breakdancing. They didn't create rapping. They didn't create DJing. They didn't create graffiti. They expanded and just did what we were doing and kind of put their own spin on it. And that's not creating. Being there is not creating. See, Fat Joe was going around talking about, yeah, we created, hip hop was created by Latins and blacks 50-50. That's disrespectful. That's extremely disrespectful because that's a complete lie. Ain't no 50-50. Some Puerto Rican being in the Bronx in the 70s ain't 50-50. That's very dismissive, and that's a form of colonization too. That's a colonizer mentality when you do that. So we have to call that type of stuff out.
Well, yeah, I did hear him say that, but in terms of context, you know, hip hop, again, we just think about rapping, and definitely blacks have dominated rap part of hip hop. But I think when we talk about hip hop in totality, when I talk about hip hop, I'm talking about the breakdancers. I'm talking about the New York City Breakers and the Rocksteady crew.
I mean, they did some great things in the 80s. They did great things in it, and people, let's keep it above. People don't even break dance no more. We got so many new dances now that foundational black Americans create. We create new dances every week. So we don't even break dance no more. They do them in competitions here and there. In fact, they're gonna have break dancing in the Olympics in a couple of years, and that's why there's this big move for everybody to claim hip hop, because now hip hop is going to be extremely commercialized. There's going to be a lot of endorsement deals coming from the corporate sector. So people are trying to get in now saying, hey, yeah, we created this too. So when the endorsements come, don't forget about us. So it's a money grab that's about to happen right now.
Well, I see that your position is about creating, and I don't know who created what. Really?
I do.
Okay, who's the first rapper?
Oh man, well, we were
That's
rapping.
a tough one. Then.
Okay,
I'm talking about hip hop rapping.
Oh, okay.
Hip hop rapping. Who do you give that credit
Well,
to?
that's Coke La Rock. The first person to rhyme at a b-boy party, that's Coke La Rock. Coke La Rock's family's from North Carolina. They've always credited Coke La Rock as the first official rapper to rap at a party. And what they did was something very nefarious. In many books, they would put down that Coke La Rock was Caribbean or he was an immigrant, which he's not. There's a book called Can't Stop, Won't Stop, calling him Caribbean. But when he did interviews, he was like, nah, I'm not Caribbean. My family's from North Carolina. So lies like that are very deliberate to take away the history from us.
I believe David Chang wrote that book, and an Asian guy wrote that book.
Yeah, he wrote that book, yeah.
So you're saying that's completely incorrect?
Completely incorrect. And Coke La Rock has done interviews like, no, I'm not Caribbean. Okay. You know, my family's from North Carolina. So yeah, he's the first technical rapper at a party, at a b-boy party. And again, a lot of the rappers from the 70s, they'll tell you, we were listening to Pig Meat Markham, the song Here Comes the Judge. They were rapping on that song. There's absolutely no different from what Pig Meat was doing on that record to what a rapper's doing now. You can actually mix his song in with rap songs now and it'll blend in perfectly.
Well, I would say that the first rap group to make a record that was not a group that was put together by an outsider had a Puerto Rican in it, the Fearless Four. The Fearless Four was a real group. They put themselves together. The Sugar Hill Gang was not a real group. They were slapped together.
No, well, you had the Funky Four plus one more. They had a record right out after the Sugar Hill Gang. You know what I'm saying?
So did the Fearless Four had Rockin' It and another song right after Sugar Hill Gang. I don't know who came first, but for Tito, one of the lead rappers in the group, to be Puerto Rican, you have to say, I don't know, you can't say he created, but he was one of the first guys on wax.
No, in 1979. When did that record come out? 79 to 80?
1980.
Okay.
Fearless Four, 1980.
Okay, yeah.
Sugar Hill Gang's 1979.
Right. You had a bunch of records in the 70s that in 1979 that came out way before that. Again, Funky Four plus one more, that came out in 79. Hell, Curtis Blow, Christmas Rapping was 79. You had a whole bunch of records coming out in 1979 right after Rapper's Delight. You had Fatback with the song King Tim III, which was actually before Rapper's Delight. So there was already groups rapping in the 70s on wax.
Yeah.
So.
Well, also, Fat Joe is probably off because I think Fat Joe maybe made that 50-50 statement out of emotion. But Puerto Ricans are a small group. You know, the island only has 3 million people, where FBA's is for 40 million.
Yeah.
So it's not going to compare numerically.
Yeah.
But because it was in the Bronx and that's where a lot of Puerto Ricans were living, you know, I think they did play a role. You're using the word create. I don't know what the right word is.
I'm saying that they just happened to be there. They didn't create anything, nor did they innovate anything, and nor did they really influence the culture, if we're going to be very honest, and that's okay. That's okay. The black people created scratching and everything. We created all of the innovations. Just because a Puerto Rican was there, you can't point to a Puerto Rican dude and say, hey, this dude did something that everybody else followed. You know what I'm saying? And that's okay.
Now, when you...
The Puerto Ricans were the first students of hip hop.
Okay.
That's okay. That's a great distinction. Just tell the truth. You're the first students of hip hop.
Well, when it comes to breakdancing, wasn't no one teaching Puerto Ricans how to dance?
Oh, they would... Man,
I mean,
they were doing old. Was that okay?
No, that's okay.
Yeah, they were doing old moves that brothers were doing in the early '70s. Again, the stuff that they were doing, we can show you stuff going back to the 1940s.
You're right about those old clips, but also we don't know who was watching these old 1940s clips of people doing the moonwalk and breakdancing.
Man, look, you talk to some of the early B-boys, they would tell you. A1 B-boy Sosa, he did an interview. He was one of the first B-boys at Herc's parties. He said, I was watching the Nicholas Brothers, Peg Leg Bates. These people would be on variety shows doing these moves. So they admit what they were seeing. They tell you what they were looking at and getting these moves from.
Now, I heard you say you're going to do a documentary on this, the history of hip hop.
Yes.
How do you plan on approaching that, being that, New York really kind of covets the history of hip hop, and you being an outsider going there to tell this, it's going to be an incredible story.
Yes,
what's your approach to that?
Well, the thing is, we have to understand, because, there's been this thing where if you ain't from New York, you can't really tell it and all that. But hell, the problem is too many people from the Bronx have been lying, all right? So liars come from New York too. And even some of the pioneers, they bicker with each other about who did what. So there's a lot of lies going on. So I'm getting a lot of those brothers and sisters who we know were there, some of the unsung heroes, because a lot of the people who were actually there in the early 70s, they got this thing where they never really interviewed them. When we talk about hip hop and see documentaries about hip hop, they'll say, well, Kool Herc started a party in 1973, and then in 1979, Rapper's Delight came out and hip hop just blew up. They skipped all of this stuff that happened right in the mid 70s. What was going on here? They never tell you. Everything is all mumbled up, and that's by design. Because when you start getting the chronology right, you'll start seeing who did what. And because there's so much mumbo jumbo there and it's all muddled, people can say anything. Well, the Puerto Ricans, they started this. Well, the Italians were doing this and this. So everybody starts lying. So I want to get the chronology right so we can tell the truth. There's so many great B-boys and MCs and DJs who were around that nobody ever talks about. Nobody talks about Disco King Mario, who somebody say is the real innovator of hip hop culture. We need to know who he is. I want people to know who Shyrock is, the first female MC. What made her get on a mic and spit the way she spits? Really Melly Mel in those guys. Nobody really knows Melly Mel's background. Who the fuck is Melly Mel as a person? What made this dude rhyme that tight in the mid 70s like that? What was his influence? What was this dude thought? What was his thought process? That's a more interesting story than to tell me about some mythological Puerto Ricans or some mythological Jamaicans who was toasting. That don't make no sense. We didn't get hip hop from no goddamn toasting. We got to stop lies like that. Black folks in the Bronx weren't listening to Jamaican music. Even Herc said he wasn't playing no Caribbean music. We didn't get anything from toasting. Let's tell the truth. I'm a truth teller.
Well, there were some prominent Puerto Ricans from the 70s, like Charlie Chase,
who's the DJ?
Whip a Whip, Joe Kondo, and I mentioned Tito from the
And Joe Kondo, he was a photographer. Photography is not an element of hip hop. Just standing somewhere and taking a picture, that don't mean, photography existed before Joe Kondo. And shout out to, he took great pictures. He took hip hop's baby pictures, but that don't make you a creator.
What did you think of the documentary from 1982 called Style Wars? It's kind of the first hip hop documentary.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember most of it. I can't remember too much of it, but I remember seeing little bits and pieces of it, but I can't remember all of it.
It was mostly about graffiti.
Yeah.
There was some breakdancing in it. Crazy Legs was in it in 1982.
And look, I was a fan of Crazy Legs. So I used to break dance in the 80s. We love Crazy Legs.
Yeah.
Look, he's a phenomenal dancer. I met Crazy Legs in Hawaii one time he was going to a competition. So they bring Crazy Legs all over the world to teach breakdancing, and nobody's taking anything away from Crazy Legs. He's a phenomenal dancer, just didn't create it.
Yeah, well, he created some moves.
Yeah,
I think there's some moves that people do all around the world that he actually innovated. In fact, in Style Wars, in that documentary, he talks about creating the elbow elbow support into the windmill, into the backspin.
That ain't creating breakdancing. That's just creating a move.
One of the most popular moves in breakdancing was created by Crazy Legs.
That's just creating a move of something that was already established.
But can you also argue that whoever the pioneers of DJing, rapping, graffiti writing are, they didn't really create it either because they were inspired by some, like you said, people were looking at 1940 stuff. So technically, nobody really created anything. They just innovated and evolved it, right?
Now, when you get something and because everything inspires the next. So you get something and you say, okay, that move that guy did, that was cool. So let me create a whole dance genre based on that. So now you are creating something. Just like with music, funk really came out of jazz hits. When you listen to some of the early funk records, like James Brown, he'll have a hit like da da ba ba. That comes out of jazz, and hitting the music on the one that goes into P-funk and the funkadelic stuff. So one movement inspires the others, but that doesn't take away from the people who really created the genre.
Now, do you think you're going to get a lot of pushback by not giving credit to Puerto Ricans, especially in this documentary? Because you're getting a little bit of it right now from Fat Joe and Crazy Legs.
Yeah, and people are calling these guys out because people are asking them, okay, what exactly did you create? They're like, well, I was there at a party. That ain't creating. So we're getting all of this stuff straight. Creating and being there at a party, it's not the same. And we're just telling the truth, and there's nothing wrong with telling the truth. Again, this goes back to not wanting to give foundational Black Americans their credit for something positive. Anytime we do something positive, we're never supposed to get credit for it. We're supposed to share it with everybody else, and that's the problem.
Okay.
Because see, here's the thing that I don't like. When hip hop was birthed, and we were going through trials and tribulations as Black people, nobody was there to share the stigma of that we were getting with hip hop. Remember, hip hop got a lot of negative stigma and a lot of negative backlash. When Black people were standing up in New York, having those B-boy parties, stealing electricity, some Black people went to jail for doing that shit. When Black people were having these parties at the parks, those were illegal parties. Some of them got away with it. Some Black people actually went to jail. When Black people were getting all of that equipment during the blackout, that helped create hip hop culture. Sometimes technology and technological advances help push a culture. Black people went through a lot of shit to make hip hop what it is, even going into the 80s when Black record labels would all get investigated by the FBI. Sugar Hill Records they were under indictment for a long time because they were clicked in with the mafia people loaning them money. Easy and those guys being investigated by the feds, Death Row being investigated by the feds, Jay Prince being investigated by the feds. See, we have to take all of the bumps and bruises, but everybody else wants to share the glory. No, if you ain't in them damn indictments and in them RICO cases, sit your ass down. You didn't create shit.
Okay. Beat Street, 1984 movie.
Good movie.
Hip hop movie. Who was stealing the electricity in that movie? Ramon and his family. They were the ones stealing the electricity in the tenements. You remember that?
I remember that.
That's the Puerto Rican family.
But that's a movie, and then he got shocked, and then they had everybody say Rainbow. It's all theatrics. But it was Black people doing the electric stealing back in the 70s, who was really getting, putting themselves in danger.